Today we're going to talk about composition. Composition is the layout of items and how they work together within your picture, drawing, whatever you're doing. So we're going to start with 4 basic shapes. So I have a cylinder, a square, a cone, and a sphere. So we're going to take those basic shapes. Now, if it helps you just to cut some out of paper, you can use whatever paper you have at home, whether it's color paper, construction paper, maybe the newspaper. You can use any of those things and cut your shapes if that helps you to kind of plan and visualize what makes a good composition. So we'll just use this white paper for a moment, and we're going to put these shapes on this paper. Okay, so I could place all 4 of them like this, but that is not a well-designed composition because there's no interacting between the shapes. There's empty space around each one. So what we want to do is have a relationship somehow between the shapes. It doesn't have to be between all of them, but somehow they have to work together within this whole visual space. So let's start by just lowering the cube down a little bit. Now these two have a relationship because we have overlapping of the circle and the square. So these are still kind of floating out there on their own. I could easily bring down the cylinder and place it behind the cube. And this one can sit by itself. So we still have movement and flow with the objects on the paper, but we have a relationship because you can tell that the circle is in the foreground, these two are in the middle ground, and this one's in the background. What wouldn't work is if I had the cylinder on top of this, let's say over here like this. That doesn't work because then it looks like it's floating because it's overlapping the cube on the top when it's actually higher on the page. It should be further behind, so like in the background. All right, for example, if this was higher on the page, then it's more in the background. If I place it behind this object, oops, now you know for sure it's behind, and then I would place this one, and so you can tell what is behind each one. So you have to think about it. Lower on the page, the items are closer to you. Higher on the page, the further away they are. So make sure you plan it accordingly. Okay, so what I'm going to have you do is I want you to design and place your 4 objects and create a good composition that you like, moving your objects around and creating that relationship that shows a foreground, a middle ground, and a background. Try to refrain from putting something right in the middle. It's not as interesting, or putting something off in the corner. The flow and the whole visual aspect with all this empty space, it's not working so well. So play around, see what you can come up with, best design. And then what I want you to do is take your design. Let's see, I think I'll do it maybe something like this. There we go. I don't know, something like that. And what we're going to do is you're going to draw those shapes 4 times on your paper. So divide your paper into 4 sections. You can free draw it or use a ruler, doesn't matter. And then you're going to start with the object that's in the foreground and draw it first. The next one would be my cone. And then my cube. It's going off the paper. I didn't plan that very well, did I? But that's okay. I will move it over on the next one. This is all going in your sketchbook, so this is all just practice. And remember those ellipses we talked about? Make sure you're drawing those ellipses. And if you need to draw the one on the bottom and then erase it, do that if that helps you get that drawn correctly. Okay, so I'm going to draw it again, but I'm going to move it over this time so I can get my cube in there. And notice where my cone is a little lower than the cube. I'll place it on here. And then my cylinder. Okay, so you're going to repeat that 4 times. Okay, I have it drawn 4 times now. Now here's the thing, this is your sketchbook. If you want to arrange it 4 different ways and do 4 different compositions, go for it. Okay, you can make each one a different composition if you like. That's perfectly fine. All right, what we're going to work on is shading. So I want you to choose one of them, and we're going to shade, like we learned before, the objects to make them show value, okay, and become forms. So we have these shapes. This one's curved at the bottom. We talked about this before. If the object is curved, make sure that you're shading it with a curved motion. And darker on one side. It's lighter as it comes around to the light. So I'd say my light's going to be over here. And then I can always come back and erase this line and make that lighter too. I put a little value on the top. Try to define that edge. One thing that you may hear us say a lot is the value defines the edge. So in other words, I won't have this line here anymore. I would have that a really light value, and then the background will come in and be darker, and then this object will show up. Okay, so for example, what I'm saying is I could put the table in across here, so that it's the table's edge. Make sure it's high enough so the shape doesn't look like it's falling off. But this is my background. Maybe the light's shining on it, but the background has a value back here. And so my object starts to show up because that background is darker. So now that's what we talk about. The value defines the edge. So it could be the value of the edge within the object. Like in here, this value is defining that edge because it's darker. Or it could be this light value here with the background darker and defining that. All right. So same with each of these shapes. Come in and shade each of those. Okay, I'm going to do that. Keep in mind that if it's curved objects, you should be shading that curved. Okay, I'm going to shade this real quick and I'll be right back. Okay, so let's talk about this for a second. So you're going to shade these objects. The light source is here, so this is lighter. It's going to be lighter on top. This side will be a mid-tone because it's a little further away from the light than the top. And the back side is in the shadow, so that's going to be much darker. Same with the sphere. It's going to be darker the further away. It might be darker down here. And same with this one. Okay, so you want to shade your object. So this one is for shading with pencil. All right, you can also make these look like they're grounded by drawing the table that they're on. So you could come in very lightly and control your pencil. So where the light is, it might be really soft and light. And as it comes around the object, it might be something like a cast shadow. Okay, so the shadow up close to the object is darker. As it filters to the light, it becomes lighter. In this case, this is next to the sphere. So it may cast a darker shadow on part of the sphere, something like that. The sphere is going to have a shadow back here, darker up close. As it comes out away from that, it'll filter to the light and be lighter. Cube, same thing, darker next to it. As it comes out, filters to the light and be lighter. Same with this one, cylinder, comes out to the light. Of course, the higher the light source, the shorter the shadow. The lower the light source, the longer the shadow. Just like when you're standing out in the sun. So keep that in mind as you're making those shading judgment calls. Where's the light source? It's very important to remember. Also note, I'm not using my fingers to smear this and make it nice and smooth. We want to see you control it with your pencil and pressure. So don't use your fingers, don't use a tortillon. We're working with controlling our hand and our pressure when we come to shade. So work on that in your sketchbook. Okay, the reason why, in case you missed on the other demonstration, the reason why we're not spraying with our fingers, because our fingers have a natural oil, and that oil gets in on our paper, and then you try to shade over it, cover it, same with pastels. That oil's in there and it doesn't go on the same way. It damages your paper, and it's also harder to erase once you've done that. So make sure that you're not smearing, that you're controlling that pencil with the amount of pressure that you use, and that you're shading. Okay, so this one's with pencil. The next ones we're going to do over here is going to be hatching. This one will be cross hatching. And this will be stippling. So I'll come back and I'll show you what those look like in the next part of this video. So what we are doing now is we're finishing up our 4 squares that we had assigned. The pencil shading one, we have the hatching is what is next, and then cross hatching and stippling. So hatching is a series of lines going the same direction. So I can start with this, and I'm using ink pen. You can use ink pen or pencil. It's kind of fun to change utensils in your sketchbook. That way you're not tempted to erase and expect everything to be perfect all the time. But the series of lines, so I put my pen down and I lift as I come across, and I have a tendency to go faster since I've done this a few times. And you lift as it comes across. So then that's hatching, all going one direction. Cross hatching is when we do it again. So I have the hatching on the side of that. And I want a little more texture, so I'm going to cross hatch. So I'm going to go the opposite direction, and this is the back side, so the lines are closer, and as it comes around, I'm going to soften those lines and put more space in between them. So then I have cross hatching. Stippling is a series of dots. So with a pen, it's going to take forever to put a series of dots on here. You could do a Sharpie and do the dots, or you can do scumbling. Okay, so you could do one or the other. You decide. Scumbling is a series of figure eights. So I'm just going to come in and I'm doing the series of figure eights on top of each other, close together, where my darker values are. And as it gets lighter, I go softer with my pen I spread out my figure eights and don't put them as close together so there's more white space. I can come in and make them smaller and tighter down here where I want it darker. And that we call scumbling. So I want you to go through and shade each of your 4 sections based on whatever you labeled. This one you have a choice, okay? And what's going to happen, then you'll have it finished. It'll look something like this, okay? So we have the shaded one, the hatching, cross hatching, and this one's stippling. And like I said, if you want to do scumbling, feel free to do scumbling. Series of 8 value, darker, closer together. Spread them out. See how light that is? Where it's getting closer to the light. And then I'll come down here and make them darker, closer together, more pressure with the pen. And thing is, if your 8s are all going the same direction, turn your paper. Do some more figure 8s a different direction, and that will help fill in some of those little white sections. Sometimes they have a tendency to land always in the same place based on your hand and the way you write. Okay, so fill those 4 in. Good luck and have fun. And remember, this is just your sketchbook. It's all about trying new things, experimenting, practicing, and getting points for practicing. Enjoy. Okay, we're going to work on shading the still life. So if you look right here, back here on the cylinder behind this pyramid, it's a little bit darker. You'll also notice that the value starts darker, shorter than my object. So I've come shorter than my object. I've started that darker value because it's a shadow. And as this comes around to the light, it's going to get lighter. So I'm going to start making that a softer value as that comes around. And the light's shining on this back edge, so I'm going to make that lighter. So this shows up as a shadow. And notice we're not smearing with our finger. We've talked about that before. So we're going to let this come lighter. But then you'll notice it's round. So what happens? It starts to get darker again. So I'm going to start darker. And then we just keep going back and filling in because we don't want it to look striped as we do it. And sometimes when we're shading, we get carried away and we get some darker values in places we didn't want it, so we need to smooth them out. So go back and apply different types of pressure with your pencil and see if you can get those smoothed out. Now, that's a little darker value there, but when I look at this, it's even darker. So I need to come in and add a little more pressure. Now, some of you may have different weights of pencils, and that's fine. You may use those. But if you have just a regular pencil, you can still do it with that. You just got to apply different pressure, and you'll be able to get those values. And you can see that's starting to dark up. The more lead that I use and pressure over it, it starts to darken that up. Okay, you can also come in and cross shade. We talked about that before. So you try to come in and fill in. So maybe I didn't get so close to those edges and it's kind of rough looking. I can softly drag my pencil across that and smooth those out. And remember, this is a curved shape. When I'm going around, I want to curve those shaded lines. That will also help that object look rounded. Of course, my bottom's a little rough, so I'm going to clean that up too. Okay, so now we can see this is a cast shadow on this object, and then this is shaded to look round. When we look at the top, okay, the light is coming from this side. So if you look right here, the light here, but then I see a shadow. And then the shadow on the sphere here, as it comes across, it's dark, but it's starting to get lighter. And then it hits my background. So I want to pay attention to all those things. So I'm going to come in shade the top lighter here. But up next to this, I'm going to start making that darker. So it'll look like that cast shadow. And if yours isn't showing strong cast shadows, then I suggest that you turn the light out and put a spotlight on it, like a lamp or a flashlight. Or if you don't have anything like that, if you have a phone, you could put the flashlight on your phone shining on it, and that will allow you to look at it. What I highly recommend, though, is that you're looking from life. Don't have a still life you set up and take a photograph, because a photograph flattens everything out. And when you go to draw it, your drawing's still going to look flat. It's not going to look three-dimensional. So from looking from life, you're actually seeing things a lot closer and a lot better, and it'll allow your drawing to look more lifelike. So then I can come in, I'm going to work on shading the sphere. Remember, we talked about shading curved objects, curved and not straight across. It will also help them look rounded. Notice my lightest side is right up here. So a little value on the back. This is going to stay pretty light, but I'm going to put a little value because it's not the white of the paper. It's actually an orange object, therefore it's not the white of the paper. So even though I'm doing it black and white, I have to show that value. So I'm going to shade this. And this is also, if you zoomed in, you'll see there's a lot of white splotchy parts, but that's where I come in and I'm going to soft shade. Okay, I'm going to turn my paper. Just easier to turn and rotate your paper, so feel free to do that to go with your natural hand movement, whether you're left-handed or right-handed. You rotate it so it's comfortable for you. And I've got something on my table underneath, and it's making that little spot darker. There's a little rough spot there. So I can leave it, it'll show texture, or I can come back and I can erase it and soften that. So I'm just going to finish this. So I went ahead and I put a little more shading in on the objects, so then I can talk to you about looking at your background. Remember before we talked about value defines edges. So this is a darker value here, which is going to define that edge. And then there's a little bit of cast shadow back here. So if this side is lighter and it's darker back here, which in this case it is, you can see it right there. So I'm going to turn my paper. So what I'm going to do is makes it easier for me to shade. I'm going to come in and make that a darker value, but the darker value is on the background. Even though the background's white, there's a shadow there because there's an object kind of hidden off the camera where you can't see it, and it is putting a little bit of shadow on that area. Now I also have a little bit of a fold wrinkle there, and so I can come in and shade that a little bit, show a value change, and then it gets lighter. But this value along this edge here is on the background, so it's defining the lighter edge of this cone without having to use like a white something, because I'm just using pencil. So I don't have to use like a white color pencil or a white charcoal pencil, anything like that. I'm still doing it with pencil, but the light is there because the background just became darker and it made it stand out. Okay, so you can go in, work on your fabric, work on your background. You do have to draw the background on your DCA, so that's why it's good to make sure it's fabric or something like that so you can see the fabric folds. Come in and do a shading. So like here, I'd marked that before, saying that was a fabric fold. So I'm going to make it darker. I'm going to make it fade out lighter. And then where it hits the light, it's lighter. And so you can kind of see how this takes shape. Now down here, there's a little more shadow. So my fabric background down here is a little darker and it fades up. What you might have to do in some cases is over exaggerate the lighting. What I mean by that is if your object and the background color seem about the same value, then like right here, then change one or the other. So I'm going to come in and I'm going to make this a stronger cast shadow along this edge because it's away from the light, so that would obviously make sense. So on my object, I'm going to go in and make that a little bit darker. And then it separates from the background a little bit more. So go in and make sure that you work on your background, just like you did your objects. Make sure you cross fill and get that nice and smooth without smearing with your finger or using anything else to smear it with. It's about controlling your pencil. That's what we're looking for. Can you shade with multiple values, controlling your pencil? Now see how this just blends into the background? But my background's white and this object is actually green. So I'm going to go back and look. And if I look here, there's a little bit of a dark area right along there. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to punch up the value on that, on my object, and I'm going to make that a little darker along that edge so that stands out away from that background. So you just need to go through, look at your objects, look at your background, look at the relationship between the objects, and determine what do I need to darken or lighten to allow that to show up a little bit more. You'll notice I'm not going in with an eraser and erasing a whole lot, because when you do that on pencil, a lot of times if you erase really hard, it's going to leave a really bold white spot, and then you're trying to blend it out, or you end up smearing the pencil lead that you worked so hard to get on there so nice and even just to erase some little something, and so it looks all smeared. So maybe consider going in and darkening an area to fix whatever the issue might be or the concern that you have. I'm going to come in and make a little shadowed area here for this block so it will look a little more 3D. You'll notice the shadows, how it makes those objects stand out even more. Okay, I'm going to do a little one across the front too, just because the way it's sitting, it kind of has a little bit of shadow there. And then this is like a fabric fold. So here, shade this just a little bit. I'm going to leave this area in the front lighter, and I'm going to blend that value out. And then I'll let this be lighter here, and then come back and make it darker. So that way it looks like a little hump in the fabric. And then of course where it comes down, it's going to smooth out, cross shade so it doesn't look scratchy. And just like I did on this box, I'm going to come over here and do the same thing to this. Just a little slight shadow because it's a foam object. It sits off that fabric a little bit, perfectly flat. And that just makes that look a little more 3D. And then I'll put a shadow here. Something I'd like to mention too is the fact that if you have a curved object and it's hitting the background, and the way that the light casts a shadow, it can change the shadow shape. So it's not the shape of the object that you're actually drawing. So if you look at this, is there anywhere or any object that you might think that would apply to if you look at any of this? Well, one I'm going to point out, it may not be too obvious for you, but would be this. The sphere that this is. Notice the shadow is curved back here, it's dark, and then it comes straight across. Well, then it curves up because it hits the background. So, but this part is much darker. So I'm going to make that darker, but then I'm going to have this darker than the object. Because if you look close, this goes dark, but guess what? It reflects the white of the fabric and leaves that little white line there, and then it gets dark again. So I'm going to leave that a little lighter. That comes around, and I can see how this is dark and then it fades out. So I'm going to work on that. And of course, when it fades up, it's lighter, and this fades out and it's lighter out here. Of course, I need to do the same thing down here. It's darker along this edge and make this fade out. Feel free to take your time and do the best job that you possibly can. I'm kind of limited on my video time here for recording, so it might seem like I'm rushing a little bit, and I apologize for that. But you take your time and do your best. Get it nice and smooth. And then once again up here, see how this is blending in? I'm going to make this darker, because if I look, it is darker there. See, here's the white, and there's that darker part. So pay attention, look close to your objects, see what they look like, look at that value. Think about it as a value scale of 1 to 10. Where would you find it? 10 being the darkest, 1 being the lightest. Is it a mid-tone, about 5, 6 in there? Or is it a 10 where it's super dark? Or 1 where it's really, really light? Okay, so if I look right here, there's this little wrinkle, little dimple in the fabric right there. So I'm going to come in, I can punch that, make that a little bit darker, and make it fade like so. And then of course there's this other one here where that goes in and comes down. So if you look at the values and you transfer the values that you see based on a 1 to 10 scale, you will be able to create your still life. Okay? Do your best. Like I said, if you have any questions, be sure to contact your teacher right away, and they will help and assist you. Good luck. Have fun.